Hello and welcome to this online course on engaging in policy, part of a series provided by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS. This is just one of many courses that you can take as part of this series. I'm Erin Heath, Associate Director of the AAAS Office of Government Relations. Here's where you might ask, what is government relations? Essentially, we connect the policy world and the scientific world. We do this in part by educating members of Congress and their staffs about issues involving science policy through letters, meetings, briefings, and congressional testimony. We also advocate for the scientific community, weighing in on policies that affect researchers and engineers. We work to keep scientists informed about what's going on in government, and we offer various training opportunities, workshops, and professional development opportunities to enable scientists to build skills beyond the bench. You'll hear more about some of those efforts in other parts of the course. I'm going to talk about how to engage in policy, but before that, I need to spend a little time talking about why. I'll start with an example. For fiscal year 2016, the National Institutes of Health, the nation's medical research agency, received a pretty major budget boost of $2 billion. This is important because NIH has lost a significant amount of purchasing power over the past several years. A little more than a decade ago, 1 out of every 3 NIH grants was funded. Now it's closer to 1 in 6. Why did NIH have a moment in 2016? I think it's because scientists, patients, doctors, engineers, grad students, postdocs, and science enthusiasts like you asked for it by speaking out about how important scientific research is to our health, to our economy, to our security, and to our way of life. What does a funding boost like this mean to you? It might mean that your research has a better chance of getting funded. That is reason number 1 for engaging in policy. Speaking up for science can help keep science going. The government also decides the rules that govern research. Rules on doing research on people, for example, or animals, or certain types of cells. Think about how much time you or members of your lab or department spend on paperwork versus doing research. Speaking out for science can change the way you do science. That's reason number 2. Reason number 3, opportunities for professional and personal growth. Many prominent scientists spend valuable time engaging in policy, even, for example, by advising the President of the United States about science and technology. It's important and it's rewarding. Finally, I'd like to touch on one other benefit of making the case for science, and that is simply the satisfaction of having a say, of making your voice heard, of knowing that you're making a difference. Now that you're persuaded, let's get to the key question. How does one engage in policy? Where do you begin? Well, I'm happy to tell you that there are many different ways to engage. Some of these ideas are going to be U.S.-centric, while others are more universal. Here we go. Let's talk about a few things you could do to engage if you have just 1 hour to do it. The first thing is learn. Take an hour to learn about a policy issue that affects you. Maybe it's a policy issue that affects science, like funding for research, or regulations that guide how research is conducted. Or maybe it's a scientific issue that bears on policy, like, say, climate change. I know what you might be thinking. You're busy. Slowing down and learning something beyond your lab or your discipline can seem like a luxury. So treat it like one. Imagine it's a Sunday morning, grab a hot tea or whatever you fancy and read up on how evolution is handled in your state science curriculum, or what members of Congress are saying about gene editing, or any number of issues that interest and affect you. You'll be glad you did. Next is vote. And not just for president. Pay attention to what's going on in your community and your state. It's one of the easiest and most important ways to make your voice heard. If you're not sure if you're registered to vote, take the time to check so you'll be ready for the next election. Every state is different, but as of this filming, 30 states, plus Washington, D.C., offer online registration, and that number seems to be growing every year. If your state doesn't, you can do it by mail or in person at any public facility that the state has designated as a voter registration site. I can't think of a better reason to wait in line at the DMV. Sign up for updates. Find a way to get updates on the issues you care about most. Find the newsletters and blogs that are covering these issues. AAAS puts out one for members every week called the Policy Alert. Sign up for an email list. Follow experts on Twitter. Like a Facebook page. Subscribe to a YouTube channel. If you're not into social media, consider using this hour to learn more about it. The important thing is finding a way to get up-to-date information that's useful to you in a way that you can work into your routine. Next, and this is an important one, find out who your elected officials are. Who's representing you in government? You can easily find out who your member of Congress is. Just go to house.gov or senate.gov and enter your zip code. You can see it here in the top right-hand corner. It's also good to know who's representing you on the state and local level. Let's say you have an hour, and it takes you 2 minutes to get the names of your U.S. senators and representatives. Spend the remaining 58 minutes learning about them and what they've said about research or science or technology or education or anything that interests you. Every member of Congress has a website that lists his or her top issues. You can also learn about what congressional committees he or she sits on. This is important because those committees help determine what your lawmaker spends time on. There is, by the way, a science committee in both chambers, Science, Space, and Technology in the House, and Commerce, Science, and Transportation in the Senate. Congressional websites also list the best way to get in touch, which leads us to call or email your elected official. You've learned who your elected officials are and you've learned about the issues. Now it's time to take action. Make a phone call or send an email. These are easy ways to make your voice heard. Lawmakers care about what you think. They want to represent their constituents. It's their job, and they want to keep that job. They may not always agree with you, but they or their staff will listen. Now, there are ways to maximize your message by coordinating with others, which leads us to find out who your government relations representative is. Chances are your institution has a government relations office. Find out who works in that office and introduce yourself. Your GR rep is your go-to source for finding out how to best engage on the federal, state, or local level. Most GR reps want to know about the amazing research you're doing and want to make sure you're aware of opportunities to talk about that research with lawmakers. And if your institution has a policy about how to engage on behalf of the institution, the GR rep will be able to share that with you. Next, find out about your scientific society. If you're watching this, you may already be a member of AAAS. If so, thank you. You also may be a member of at least one society pertaining to your scientific discipline. Many scientific societies take action on policy. You can go to their websites, find out the issues they're following, and how you can engage with them. Often societies have action alerts. These tend to be email lists. You simply sign up to be contacted when action needs to be taken on a policy issue. Some societies also work to directly connect their members with the policymaking community. And the final suggestion for how to engage in policy in an hour? Watch a webinar or an online course, like this one. Many organizations do 1-hour webinars or videos on policy topics. Watch one on your lunch break or listen to a podcast on your way to work. It's worth the time. You've already learned some ideas for what you can do to engage in policy with a single hour of time. Let's say you've gotten a taste and you're ready for more. What can you do in a day? The first thing I'll suggest is write. Write an op-ed or a letter to the editor for your local newspaper. You can also write a blog post. Seek out opportunities to guest blog on established sites or create your own and put effort into promoting it. A few quick tips here for writing for a news outlet. Make one point and reinforce it. Tie your point to something going on in the news. And make sure to know the publication's rules of the road, such as what word count you need to target. Getting comfortable with communicating with a popular audience will pay dividends both in and out of the lab. If you'd like to learn more, click on the section on communicating science. Next, visit your member of Congress. Come to Washington for a day or visit your state and local representatives. Many scientific societies and universities bring scientists to Capitol Hill to meet with their lawmaker at least once a year. Some do it on their own, and others unite with other groups for maximum impact. There's usually a training component to these events, and many scientists find them to be quite rewarding. But you don't have to wait for these opportunities to come along, because members of Congress also have district offices, that is, offices in their own districts that you can visit. Why do this? As you can see, according to the survey by the Congressional Management Foundation, in-person visits have the strongest influence on members of Congress. And it goes beyond making your voice heard. When you speak to your member of Congress, you're giving him or her a story to tell and letting him or her know that you're a scientist in the district that can provide expertise. Want more? On the left, click on the Working with Congress section. Learn about the budget. Why should you learn about the federal budget? It's a complex process, and a lot of it may seem like inside baseball, but it's at the heart of everything a researcher cares about. Will I get funding for my work? How many colleagues will share my lab? What kind of equipment will I use? What kind of research will I be building from? Everyone who wants to be more informed about policy should know how the sausage is made, and on that note, AAAS has an excellent resource on this, the R&D Budget and Policy Program. You can hear more about the Federal Research and Development Budget by clicking on the Budget section. Next, nominate your peers. I'm thinking specifically of an award program called the Golden Goose Awards. What are the Golden Goose Awards? The Golden Goose Awards honor federally funded research that may seem odd or obscure, but ends up having a major economic or societal impact. This matters because for decades, certain members of Congress have publicly challenged research grants. A few here, a few there, often because they have funny-sounding names or pertain to certain fields of science. But science is anything but predictable, and sometimes it's the funny-sounding work that makes the biggest difference. The Golden Goose Awards tell these stories. We're looking for yours. Now on to what can you do in a week? 1. Offer public comments. We talk a lot about Congress, but after the laws are passed, it's up to the executive branch to implement those policies. Federal agencies are constantly putting out policy documents that are open for public comment. Draft regulations, for example, or requests for information. Often, they'll issue detailed questions about the impacts of a certain policy. They want to hear from the experts. That's you, members of the scientific community. You'll often see these opportunities reported by scientific societies, for example in the AAAS Policy Alert, or you can visit the government portal regulations.gov. Next, attend a training. There are myriad opportunities to come to Washington to learn about policy or build the skills to engage in policy. There's also the possibility of bringing training to your own community. Again, check with the Government Relations Office at your institution and your scientific society. Here are some opportunities that AAAS offers. Communicating science trainings, in which AAAS will come to your campus to provide interactive communications workshops. The Science and Technology Policy Forum, a 2-day policy conference held every spring in D.C. The CASE Workshop. This is a Science Policy 101 workshop specifically tailored to grad students. The Leadership Seminar, another science policy workshop for all professionals. And the AAAS Annual Meeting, a great way to learn about science inside and outside of your field, build skills, and network with other science and engineering professionals. Next, plan a visit from your lawmaker to your campus or lab. Collectively, this activity probably takes about a week to plan, but you'll want to start that planning in advance. Invite your member of Congress to visit your lab. Again, work with your institution's Government Relations Office on this. Contact your member's district office. Members of Congress love meeting constituents, particularly when they're doing interesting work, like science. Some scientific societies also have organized efforts to encourage such district visits and provide the tools to do it. Finally, read a book. Quite simply, read a book on science policy. We have one called Working with Congress. It tells you everything you need to know about meeting with your senator or representative, and there are many more. At this point, you've whetted your appetite for science policy. How do you take it to the next level? One way is to do a fellowship. There are many different fellowship programs out there that offer policy training and exposure. Often, these are run by professional societies, foundations, or the government itself. AAAS has a long-standing competitive program that connects scientists and engineers with one-year positions in the legislative, executive, and now even judicial branches of government. It's called the Science and Technology Policy Fellowships Program. You can hear more about that program by clicking on the Fellowships tab to the left. AAAS also has a mass media fellowship program for those who want to spend a summer working within the media, for example, as a newspaper writer, and a program called the Leshner Leadership Institute, which focuses on public engagement. Start or advise a science policy group. Science policy groups are cropping up on campuses all around the country. They're a great way for grad students to explore issues, develop trainings, and plan projects like, say, a lab tour for a member of Congress. Some science policy groups have even gained national recognition for their work. If your student days are over, consider advising or supporting a science policy group on your campus. Next, teach a science policy course. It can be challenging but extremely rewarding to get a science policy course going on your campus. It's important to offer a broad range of skills-building opportunities for scientists and trainees. This is a great way to do just that. Serve on a government advisory board. These exist at the federal, state, and local level. Where can your scientific expertise come in handy? Maybe it's the local school board as it grapples with science education. Or maybe it's an air quality board, or a neighborhood advisory commission. Maybe it's advising a government official like, say, the director of a research agency or even the president. These are all opportunities to share what you know and make a difference in your community, which leads to running for office. Some scientists decide to jump into the fray by running for office, often starting with the local school board or city council. We're short on scientists in government. To illustrate, this is a recent Congressional Research Service report on the makeup of the current Congress. As you can see, there are only a handful of members with any scientific background. Here's a good place to mention the Engaging Scientists and Engineers in Policy Coalition, an ad hoc coalition whose mission is to empower scientists and engineers to effectively engage in the policymaking process at all levels of government. ESEP provides resources that touch on many of the ideas I've mentioned. What about a lifetime? For one, you can start a science policy program. Beyond teaching a course, this is laying the foundation for a new minor perhaps, or a certificate program in science policy. This is true capacity building. Second, make science policy your career. Many scientists and engineers come to Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, catch the policy bug and never look back. Making a career of supporting science can be exciting and incredibly rewarding. And finally, get involved with your scientific society. Most have opportunities not just to build skills in policy, but to build capacity in other ways. At AAAS, for example, you've heard about some of our policy and communications programs. We also have programs on education, science and the law, human rights, science and religion, science diplomacy, and more, as well as Science with a capital S. That's our series of journals. We believe we have a mission worth supporting, and we are thrilled that you've joined us. Thank you. Now, to further explore some of the opportunities I've mentioned so far, we have special units on communicating science, working with Congress, understanding the federal budget, and Spotlight on Policy Fellowships. Please click on the buttons on the left to learn more about these. Again, thanks for watching. Hello again, and welcome to this segment of Engaging in Policy. I'm Erin Heath, here with AAAS Public Engagement Manager Jeannie Braha, who will talk to us a little bit about communicating science. Jeannie, to start, can you tell us a bit about your work in the Center for Public Engagement with Science and Technology?
Sure. At the Center for Public Engagement, we work to build capacity for scientists to engage with public audiences of all sorts. So that includes policymakers, the general public, and all sorts of other audiences. We provide training to scientists so they have the skills and confidence to communicate effectively and concisely with those audiences in a way that matters to them. We demonstrate public engagement. Many of our members have seen Family Science Days each year at the AAAS annual meeting. And finally, we work to bring together the researchers who study public engagement with the practitioners, like public information officers, people like you, so that the practice that we provide to scientists can be informed by the best available research.
Why is it important for scientists and engineers to learn about communicating to a non-scientific audience?
Sure. So science is so much a part of our lives in so many different ways. And the way that science advances is through a back and forth between science and society. So by communicating clearly and concisely about their work, scientists can both share their work so that it can inform decisions that we make individually and collectively in society, but they can also hear perspectives, worldviews, and new ideas that they may not have thought of otherwise, so that future research agendas can be more reflective of societal needs and interests.
Scientists and policymakers come from very different cultures. How does this culture clash affect communications?
Well, it means that scientists need to be proactive in the way that they communicate with policymakers. Scientists are trained to communicate in a technical manner with their fellow scientists. That's a large part of the scientific training that many scientists receive. When you almost need to flip that on its head when you're communicating with a public audience like policymakers, and think about what matters to those policymakers. Think about how to communicate your research in a way that is less technical than you might with a fellow scientist, lab mate, and think about a way to frame it in a way with words and ideas that will help make a connection between what the policymaker cares about and what the scientist is researching.
Let's talk about messaging. What are some top tips for developing a message that scientists and engineers want to get across when engaging in policy?
Well, like I just said, I think it's really important for scientists to think about what matters to their audience, what the policymakers are interested in, and think about how their science relates to that topic, so that they can really frame that message in a way that will be relevant to those policymakers. And importantly, scientists should also think about how to communicate their science in a way that is clear and concise. So stripping out all of the technical language, the jargon that the policymakers may be familiar with, but may lead to a longer conversation and take a longer route to getting to the bottom line.
Do you have any tips that pertain specifically to interacting with the media?
Sure. A lot of the communication tips that we give for any audience pertain as well to the media. However, when working with the media, scientists want to be particularly proactive. It's very important to plan those messages out ahead of time. Start with the bottom line, the facts that are most important to have in that article for you as the scientist. And really focus on speaking clearly, concisely, and be patient. The journalist may be taking notes or waiting for you to say something and hoping that you'll fill that empty space.
What are some common communications pitfalls for scientists and engineers, and how can they avoid them?
So, as I mentioned, scientists are trained to communicate with other scientists, and it's a really effective and efficient way to get their work done. When working with public audiences, you almost flip that on its head, and you need to communicate in a way that matters to them. So scientists need to think about the ways that they can take off their scientist hat, if you will, and communicate as if they were just talking to a friend about something totally unrelated to their science. Many scientists find themselves getting excited about the science that they're sharing and falling back into those scientist ways of speaking. Jargon is a very common pitfall for many scientists. We find ourselves relying on those terms, those technical terms that have a very precise meaning, rather than translating those words into clear and concise descriptions of the scientific phenomenon.
How has the internet and social media changed the landscape?
Sure. The internet and social media offer many ways for scientists to communicate with public audiences. The internet is where the vast majority of people, particularly in the U.S., go to find information about science and specifically about specific scientific information. So if they're looking for information about a specific topic, they'll look online first. It's probably a familiar concept for many of us. It can increase the pace of the conversations about the science, and may seem to broaden the communication that a scientist is doing, but in fact we encourage scientists to think really carefully about the audiences they're reaching and use particularly social networks as tools to reach outside of that regular group that they may reach, to find other audiences that they want to connect with, and to be very deliberate and proactive about thinking about where they are, what channels of communication they're using, and how they can connect with those people via social media.
Finally, for scientists who want to up their communications game and engage in policy, where should they start?
Well, we can recommend the AAAS Communicating Science Workshop Program, where we offer training to scientists in public engagement and are partnering with the Office of Government Relations to help reach policymakers. Many campuses as well, and federal agencies and other institutions that are home to scientists have a communications officer, public information officer, or other professional who supports scientist communication practice. And if all else fails, talk to your colleagues and find out who's been doing public communication or communication with policymakers and ask them for some tips.
Thanks so much, Jeannie, for joining me. For much more on communicating science, take Jeannie's online course called Communicating Science, or check us out at AAAS.org. Thanks for watching. Hello and welcome to this segment of Engaging in Policy. Erin Heath here with AAAS Senior Government Relations Officer Sean Gallagher, who will talk to us a little bit about working with Congress. Sean, you've worked in 5 different congressional offices. Tell me about the life of a typical Capitol Hill staffer.
Super exciting. The typical staffer will have a day that varies based on week to week and month to month, but typically it has a lot to do with responding to what's going on at home and then responding to what's happening in the news and the media. So it's a lot of answering phone calls, looking at your emails, meeting with constituents and interest groups, lobbyists. And again, it's dealing with the news of the day. So if there's a major news event that's happening, you're doing a lot of research on that, how to prepare your congressman or your boss, and also looking how it affects your congressional district. So are there jobs affected at home, or are there people that you know that might be mildly or majorly affected by any event that's going on? So all in all, it could vary, but a lot of it is doing with responding to what's happening and how it affects you and your district, and in a lot of the research that's involved in kind of dealing with that process.
Interesting. Tell me about how much the typical member of Congress knows about science or deals with scientific issues.
So I would say on the whole, the depth of scientific knowledge on Capitol Hill, both for members of Congress and their staff, is not very much. And I don't say that insultingly at all. I mean to say that they deal with so many issues, ranging from agricultural policy to energy policy, or maybe something as small as postal affairs. Really, it runs the range of issues is the gamut that affects everything that you could imagine touches the government. And so their knowledge on issues, whether it's science and technology or maybe healthcare, is mainly surface level. Certain members of staff and certain members of Congress will have a lot of knowledge on one particular issue, but typically on a whole range of issues, it's going to be very surface level knowledge. And so for STEM literacy, as we call it, science, technology, engineering, and math, the knowledge that they have on that is going to be very related to their district. Do they have a university in their district that gets research dollars from the National Science Foundation? They'll know stuff like that. Or if there's a business that does quite a bit of research for, say, military affairs, is there someone in their district that does, say, weapons system, and therefore there's R&D involved in that. They'll know stuff like that, but in terms of graduate or maybe even undergraduate level scientific affairs, they're not going to have that deep kind of knowledge. And so it's important to understand that when you're dealing with a member of Congress or their staff on scientific issues.
Let's take this step by step. You're a researcher. You want to meet with your member of Congress. How does this happen?
So it's actually quite easy. Members of Congress and their staff should be very responsive to you as a constituent. So the first step is to just Google who your member of Congress is. It should pop up right away. And then you can look up where to meet them. Now, every congressional office has both a district and a DC office. The easiest one to meet with, of course, is your district office. Some members of Congress who represent very large districts, say in like Oklahoma or northern Michigan, will have multiple district offices so that you don't have to drive so far to meet them. This is going to be your easiest point of access. You can call them up and say, hey, I'm a constituent and I'd really like to meet on whatever issue it is that you'd like to meet on. And they'll typically say, oh, that's great. And they'll try to arrange a time, and then they'll connect you with a staff person who's responsible for that issue. And so that's the first process, is to set up that meeting and go. And then when you go in, you prepare for that meeting and what you want to talk about and the things that you want to convey.
You schedule the meeting with your member of Congress or a member of his or her staff. How do you prepare for a Good Hill meeting?
Preparation is absolutely key, and I cannot stress this enough. You have to think about the members of Congress and their staff have a million different issues that they're dealing with. Anything that is in the news that day or is affecting their constituency or their district. And so you really have to prepare for a very small amount of time to convey all the important things that you want to say in that meeting. So the first thing to do is to realize what the priorities of your congressperson and their staff are. What committees do they sit on? What issues are really important to them? A very quick and easy research on the internet will provide all of this information. So you take that info, the issues that are important to them and the things that they work on and talk about the most, and then you see how your work or your research or your job or your interests relate to those issues and interests of your congressperson and their staff. So that's the best start to figure out how it is that you can convey your message to their interests and their likings. And so you prepare for what committees do they sit on, what kind of responsibilities do they have, and how your work or your interests intertwine with those and intersect with those. So that's the first step. And the second step is really preparing how to articulate your message. Why is it what you do is valuable both to them and to the country, and why is it worth their time to pay attention to you? So again, you have to think about their priorities. They're stretched thin. They're dealing with everything under the sun, and you're only one meeting and maybe 8 or 9 meetings that day. You're one email among a zillion emails that day. And so you really have to try and make your case. As simple and as valuable as science is to our community, our country, and to the progress of humankind, it's not always that easy to articulate. And so you really have to practice. Get inside, prepare for a meeting, see how you sound, bounce your ideas off of friends, see what they think, and then take that, condense it, and then when you go in and meet with them, you'll be a lot better prepared to articulate your issue, to make your case, and to make a very good impression, because that's key.
As a former Hill staffer, do you have any words of caution? Is there anything about a typical Hill meeting or anything about the culture of Congress that a scientist might find surprising?
Yes. First word of caution, or first recommendation, I would say, is be positive. Congress, as we all know, sometimes gets a bad rap. People like to kind of hate on Congress a little bit. Some of it's deserved. But you have to understand that this is their job. This is what they do. This is what they're passionate about. And so a lot of times folks come in and say their issue or their priority is better than X, Y, or Z. You want to resist that line of thinking. You want to go in there and be positive about what it is that you do, but don't be negative on other issues of the day. Remember, there's a whole list of priorities that staff and congresspeople are dealing with, and you're only one of those. And you want to make a good, positive impression to them. So a word of caution is just to be nice, to be respectful, and to not really hate on anything else that they might be doing or how Congress is doing, and things of that nature. So that's a very good first step. And then also be cautious on the give and take. You have to understand when you have a meeting with a congressperson and their staff, it's important to realize that it's a conversation and not to monopolize time. A lot of folks get really excited to meet a congressperson and their staff. They really want to relate the importance of their issue. But you have to understand they need to value what it is that you do, and the only way to really do that is to get them to understand what it is that you're doing and the work that you're undertaking. And so it's important to have a conversation, a dialogue, so it's not just a one-way lecture that they might forget later on. You want them to be engaged. You want them to be excited as you are about their things. So a word of caution is, again, be positive and not to monopolize time in your meeting with them, to really engage them.
How do institutions and scientific societies play into all of this?
They play a tremendous role. So institutions like universities and scientific societies like the American Association for the Advancement of Science, they deal constantly with government relations, as we call it. And so they're monitoring the news, they're monitoring the legislative cycle, they're looking at what Congress is doing on a daily basis. And they're typically, first and foremost, a very good resource. So you can go and ask them and you say, hey, I'm really concerned about the research that I'm doing or the priorities that I'm focused on that are not getting enough attention. How do I make my case? What's the first step? Who it is that I talk to? Most of those institutions and societies will have key people that can immediately hook you up with whoever it is that you want to talk to and be the right point of contact. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, those institutions probably will already have a whole resource of information based on whatever issue it is that you're concerned about. So for example, if you're a neuroscientist, there's a society just for you that does all the work for neuroscience research. And you can go to them and you can talk to them about the issues of the past, the issues of the present, what they're focused on, and how your work intertwines with their own. So use these societies. They're here for you as a resource, and they're actually pretty eager to help.
My last question is, do you have any advice for following up after your meeting with a member?
Yes. Follow up, and I cannot stress this enough, is key. Again, members of Congress and staff receive thousands of emails a day. They meet with tons of people over the course of their time. And a lot of times these are just one-shot meetings, which are unfortunate. Because if you think about it, the issues that you're doing are never going to go away. They're probably going to come up over and over again. And so follow-up is really key. If you go and meet with them about a particular bill or legislation, see how that bill is progressing over time and what that congressperson and what that staff person have done to respond to your needs on that bill. And if you do that, you'll make an impression that you're not just there for a one-time visit or a one-time phone call, but you're monitoring this and it's very important to you, and so they need to watch it just as well. So make sure when you meet with them, take their business card, write it down, and schedule a time right after your meeting to follow up on them, particularly if the thing that you're talking about comes up again in the news or in the legislative cycle.
Well, thanks so much, Sean, for joining us. If you'd like to learn more about working with Congress, please do check out the AAAS Office of Government Relations on the web, AAAS.org. Thanks for watching. Hello again, and welcome to this segment of Engaging in Policy. I'm Erin Heath, here with Matt Hourahan, Director of the AAAS R&D Budget and Policy Program, who will paint a brief picture for us of the federal budget process. Matt, for the newcomer, how should we think about the federal budget process?
Well, the federal budget process kind of plays out at two different levels. There's the macro level and the micro level. Now at the macro level, we're talking about the overall fiscal context. Now what that means is just about all federal science spending is part of the discretionary budget. And that's the part of the budget that Congress allocates every year through the appropriations process. The size of the science budget is in fact almost directly determined by the size of the discretionary budget. Now over many years, really decades, the discretionary budget has been declining as a share of federal expenditures. At the same time, another part of the budget, what's known as the mandatory budget, has been growing, and that's mostly due to growth in entitlement programs. So as the one category, mandatory spending, increases and discretionary spending decreases, it has implications for long-term science spending. So following along on regarding the decisions that the government makes about how to allocate between these two sources of funding is important for understanding how science funding may fare in the long run.
So that's what we need to know about the macro level. What about the micro level?
So the micro level is what happens in the appropriations process itself. And that's when appropriators in the House and the Senate are making decisions on how big each spending bill should be, how large each agency's budget should be, and also allocating between programs within given agencies. So for example, a lot of the debates that we see and that we might think of when we talk about federal science funding happen at this micro level during the appropriations process. For example, Congress may be debating whether to allocate between fossil energy technology or renewable energy technology, or they may be debating whether to fund climate research or social sciences research. And these are the decisions that happen every year, and these are the decisions that also affect scientists and engineers directly.
Once a federal research agency receives its final appropriation, then what happens?
Well, it's important to remember that appropriators aren't operating in a vacuum. Usually when they're making their funding decisions, they're reacting to extensive budget documents that the agencies have already prepared over several months before those documents even go to Congress. So agencies have a pretty good idea when they do get their appropriation of how they're going to want to spend that money for the most part. For example, if I'm at NIH, I'm already going to have a pretty good idea of what funding announcements I may want to issue, although I may have to change some of those plans based on developments in the science or based on whether I got the appropriation I thought I was going to get. It's the similar story at other agencies, at NSF, for example, or at NASA. And NASA in particular has a lot of long-term projects in development. So they're going to have a pretty good idea of how much they may need to spend, not just in the current year, but in the years ahead.
Matt, finally, where should scientists who want to get engaged in the federal budget process turn for information?
So one place to start would be the government affairs professionals at your respective institutions or the science societies to which you may belong. There are going to be a lot of folks who are involved day to day with that funding debate, and getting engaged with those folks is a good first step.
Thanks, Matt, for joining me. If you'd like to hear a lot more about the federal budget, please check out Matt's course, Understanding the Federal R&D Budget, right here on this website. Also, check out his program page at AAAS.org. Thanks for watching.